You're listening to In Network, Nordic's podcast series where we explore healthcare and technology with experts from around the globe.
Hello, and welcome to the In Network podcast feature, Designing for Health. I'm Nordic's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Craig Joseph. Today, I sit down with Brandy Parker, Senior Design Director at IDEO. Yes, that IDEO. To explore how world-class human-centered design shapes real-world health outcomes. We unpack her unconventional path from social science to design innovation and dig into standout projects like Teal Health's at-home cervical cancer screening kit. Brandy also shares why so-called bad prototypes are a designer's best friend, how workarounds reveal what patients and clinicians really need, and why unboxing matters just as much for medical tests as it does for iPhones. If you're a healthcare executive or clinical leader trying to make patient adherence more than just a buzzword, this conversation will give you practical, behavior-driven insights for designing care experiences that people actually complete and even enjoy. Let's plug in. Brandy Parker, welcome to the pod. Where do we find you today?
Thanks for having me on. I am in Chicago. I'm in the IDEO office, Chicago office.
Awesome. So you've given away that you work for a company called IDEO.
I do.
So first of all, I'd love to get some background. How did you get to where you are now? And then tell us a little bit about this company that you work for that no one's ever heard of. And by no one, I mean everyone's heard of them.
So I work for, maybe I'll start there. Yeah, I work for IDEO. IDEO is like a global design innovation consultancy. It's been around for about 40 years, and it's most famous for having a strong relationship with Apple at the beginning. And so we designed the first mouse for Apple, for example. Had a really strong partnership with Apple for a number of years and mainly started within product design, but we kind of expanded beyond product design. We now do service design, digital design, really any kind of design. We're there.
Yeah, I was going to say, how does one get a job there?
Well, it was a long path, but my whole career really has been in design and innovation and research. My background is in the social sciences. So I really come at it from the language of consumer health and really thinking about behaviors and like the feelings that go into design is really what I focus on. So really thinking about behavioral design and came at it from that direction. I started my career at a little place called Conifer Research, which is a small design research consultancy. I accidentally found my way there. It was long enough ago that I was hired as a temp to do transcription for their ethnographic interviews. So it's a lot of anthropologists at Conifer Research, and they were doing deep ethnography to kind of understand business problems. And so I was doing transcription. I started out doing transcription of their interviews. And I guess I was asking the right kinds of questions because within a month or so, they asked me if I would join full time. I was noticing things in the interviews like, well, someone said this, but their face said something different. Should I capture that somewhere in the transcript? So I think that they just saw that background in behavioral science being aligned with their approach. And so they asked me to join the team full time. So I was trained there by anthropologists for a number of years, worked on projects across industries, and really got exposure to like deep ethnographic research methods there. And so from there, I really I noticed that I liked working on everything. I could be interested in anything. I have that capacity, but I was drawn most to the projects that were about health, that were really thinking about how do we create conditions under which people can thrive and lead healthy lives. And those were the types of projects I started to gravitate towards. And so I started to kind of make a path for myself within that. I didn't have a health background. I just had a social science background. So I started to make a path for myself within that. I eventually then thought that I might want to go into the clinical space. So I did a master's of nutrition and I did pre-med, actually. I almost went to med school. And I was working with a lot of doctors at that time who just kept asking me questions about what I did. They said, what you do actually sounds really interesting. And I would like to switch into that, actually. How might I work in design or innovation consulting? And so I kind of had a moment where I had to make the decision, do I keep pursuing this path to go into medicine? Do I continue in design? And I realized that I accidentally ended up in an industry that I really loved. And so what I wanted was just to have that focus on health. And so then I kind of redirected my design career to be design for health. That's where I've been ever since. And so I'm a senior design director here, and I lead the health portfolio of work. And so my full focus is on.
That's a great kind of story and pathway. And I just want to call out two things. One is for some of our younger listeners, transcriptions used to be generated by humans. So I want to throw that out there because I know it's kind of like the typewriter. There's some kids listening who don't understand that. So the second thing I want to call out is you were not doing strictly what you were told to do. You started asking questions like, well, they said this, but I'm thinking from their expressions that they might be thinking something else. And how do I put that in there? And just to, again, call out for the kids, and AI is not going to do that. And so sometimes there are jobs that, maybe technology can do, but humans can bring, or certain humans at least can bring a different perspective. I love the fact that you were pre-med, you were thinking about going to medical school, and many of the physicians and other clinicians that you were interacting with said, we don't want to talk about healthcare. We just want to talk more about what you're doing because that's more interesting. And how do I get a different gig? That is really quite common. I get this. I get a similar reaction sometimes since I'm not practicing now, and people ask me how did you get into that, and maybe I should do that, but very few people do, right?
They actually would tell me too. They would say you're wonderful and you will hate it here. I could tell you just based on how you're asking, you're asking a lot of questions. They're really good questions. You're actually going to probably enjoy what you do more.
I thought it would be fun just to dive right into a couple of the projects that you've done. And the first one I want to call out is Teal Health.
Yeah, so Teal Health is a project that IDEO did. It's one of the projects that we're really proud of at the moment. What it is, it's an at-home cervical cancer screening. And so if you know anything about cervical cancer, you know that cervical cancers, it's one of the cancers it's actually nearly 100% preventable, but if you catch it early. But 1 in 4 women they're not up to date on their screenings for cervical cancer. And that's something that disproportionately impacts Black and Asian and Hispanic women. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, cancer screening in general, it's hard for people to stay up to date on their screenings, but Pap smears in particular, they're uncomfortable at best, and they're just completely inaccessible at the worst. And particularly if you think about trans women, minority women, disabled women, it can be tough. It can be really inaccessible for them to get Pap smears. So Teal Health, what they really wanted was to create like a comfortable and accurate at-home test that women could use at home, and they wanted to improve the screening rates. So working together with IDEO, the team set out to really design something that was going to be a functional prototype, something that we could actually test. It would be the first of its kind. And so want to make sure it actually delivers accurate results that would be comparable to something that they would get in office, and just make sure that the idea was viable. So we set out to design that. Some of the things that went into that design, things like it has to be designed to be standing up, because the private place in your home is going to be your bathroom. And so it's going to be something that you have to design to be used standing up. It's going to have to be easy because people aren't going to have medical training to do this. It has to be pretty comprehensive. It has to look easy too, because people are going to be worried that they're not going to do it correctly. So the team really leaned on some key factors to make sure that this was accessible. One example of that was things like leaning into shapes that a lot of women are already familiar with. For example, the design that we came up with is somewhat similar. It has a cylindrical shape like a tampon would. So that's a shape that a lot of women are familiar with. So kind of turning towards items that represent, I don't necessarily want to say comfort when we talk about that, but items that will be familiar, that they understand how to use. And so those were some of the things that the team was thinking about as they designed it in collaboration with users. And the results of it were pretty impressive. I think as IDEO, we're really proud of the results that we saw from the participants. So, for example, 92% of the users said that if they knew the results were equal to that they would get in an office, that they would prefer to do self-collection. So it was like 87% said that they would be more likely to stay current on their screening if Teal was an option that was out in the world. So that's extremely strong results, and results that I get really excited about, because if you design something that can be more accessible, particularly more accessible for folks that might be at the margins, then that just makes it easier for everyone. We're really hoping that once Teal is out on the market, it can start to improve that early screening rate and get more people screened sooner.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that you had mentioned is that IDEO was involved with Apple, a term that I've heard called unboxing. It sounds really crazy, but I think we all understand what that is now. But Apple certainly has mastered that, and my understanding is there's something with Teal Health that you make sure to kind of create that cool unboxing experience. Is there something that you can talk about from that perspective? I'm just fascinated by the fact that how something is stored and delivered to you will have a significant impact on whether or not you use it and how you feel about it.
It really does. It really can. And that's what excites me so much about design, is there's so much potential for really small changes to have a really significant impact. And one of the things that excites me as a designer and as someone with a social science background is designing for how people feel during a process, because how people feel matters. And that's when we do a number of at-home health kits, not just Teal. And one of the things that we found across these is that unboxing moment is super important in terms of how people are going to react to the idea of taking this test, because they've agreed to take the test. It's showed up at their door. So in theory, they've agreed to take it. But it's different when you actually get to that moment of following through with it versus it just sitting on your counter, and what gets you over that hump. So, for example, one of the projects that we're working on, we developed something that we joked, we called it the gumption graph, which is how much gumption does it take to work up to actually do the test and not just have it sit on your counter? Like what is it that helps you overcome that? And we found that there are small changes that you can design for. So, for example, since it's not something that people are used to doing, they're worried they're going to get it wrong. Everything about the design when they open it should look simple. So even something as simple as having to take something out of a container that it's already in, it already looks harder. Just have it sitting out and visible. Have everything that's possible be visible and laid out in a way that makes it look easy. It makes it look like there are 3 steps to do it. Make the instructions super clear, very visual. Simple things like that can make all of the difference. Another thing we think about is it's a moment where this can potentially be a reminder of, especially if it's a cancer screening, but really with a lot of screenings, it's potentially a reminder of that you're going to get diagnosed with an illness. It's potentially a reminder of your mortality. It could bring up feelings that you have about family members who have maybe passed or have this particular condition. There are all sorts of things that might make you want to push this away. Maybe I'll just do it tomorrow. Maybe I'll do it at a different time. And so some of what we do is looking at how can we reframe the visual language or even the actual language that's on the packaging to communicate, rather than it being an illness test, communicate to them, this is about you taking care of yourself. This is something positive that you're doing for health. This is something that should be energizing, that you should be proud of yourself for.
It's amazing how little we most of us think about these little design ideas. We just send you a box, and right, and we told you about it, and we told you it was really important, and that was the end of that. And it's going to get shipped, and we'll talk about it when we get the result. That's actually practicing really good medicine, what I just said, and without thinking anything about all of the different ideas about disease versus health, and is it too complicated? And if I do it wrong, does that mean going to get diagnosed with cancer when I don't have it, or worse, am I going to get diagnosed as being fine when I do have it? And so, yeah, lots of different emotions there that you have to kind of think about. Let's talk about patient adherence. I know you love that term. Adherence or compliance is another term that people really love. When patients are non-compliant,
they're a problem.
that means that they didn't do what I told them to do. And,
exactly.
My children are often non-compliant with what I tell them to do. And so, patients can be non-compliant or non-adherent too. So let's talk about that. How do you kind of approach that to do what we need them to do, but not just one time over the course of days, months, or years?
I do use the term patient adherence, but I don't particularly like it. I also don't really like the term behavioral design. I use it, but I don't particularly like it. And the reason I don't like it is because I think that there's something about it that implies that there's a problem with the person and their motivation, and there's a little bit of an undercurrent of, to me, I don't think it's intended to have this necessarily. But to me, there's a bit of an undercurrent of, these pesky people, they just won't stay on their treatments. How do we get them to stay on their treatments? Or how do we get them to make these behavioral changes? And I think maybe it's my perspective as being a designer who actually works on what do we actually do to change some of these things? Because when you work on these problems as a designer, you realize the issue is not adherence. It's often things like patient education or patient accessibility is really what we're talking about. Adherence implies like this stubbornness or refusal to stick with the program. There may be that in some sense, but let me give an example. So I did some work designing patient experience for a clinical trials process. So it's a process I don't know if you've ever worked on clinical trials yourself, but it's notoriously difficult to recruit clinical trial participants. It's notoriously difficult to get them to stay within the clinical trial for the length of time that they're needed. There's a lot of drop off within the clinical trial experience. Talk about kind of like an adherence problem with clinical trials, right? And so when we worked on designing the solutions for that, it was the things that we uncovered that would be really helpful were things like, hey, are all the materials in the language of choice for the person? Can we design some AI? Can we start using and working towards AI translation tools that actually get all of the materials into the person's language of choice? It's something that seems simple or maybe like unsexy to design for participants' first language or language of preference. But if they're getting materials that they don't understand, then how are they supposed to actually follow up, right? So it's things like that. We explored things like transportation services because of some of the biggest barriers are just getting to the clinical trial sites. How can we kind of optimize where they're going to go for the clinical trial and how they get there? It's things like, how can we eliminate the wait times? A lot of times people drop out of clinical trials because they go to the clinical trial sites and they're sitting there waiting for an hour, sometimes even 2 hours before they're able to see the people that are going to be taking their readings for that day. And obviously, if you go and you sit there for an hour, 2 hours out of your day, that's not a great experience. That really cuts into your day. And so how can we explore processes on the back end that actually reduce those wait times? And the consent process can be extremely laborious. There's so many opportunities to streamline the consent process in clinical trials. So it was things like that we were designing. It wasn't necessarily about the motivation to sign up for a clinical trial and the education about a clinical trial is important, but actually retaining people in a clinical trial, it's often because the experience is just a really challenging one, or that it's an inaccessible experience. And so oftentimes what you're designing for is accessibility or education, not necessarily motivation.
I remember the first time I heard Uber with respect to healthcare. I think they have a division called Uber Health. And at first I was picturing them doing throat cultures in the back of the car, but that's not what they do. What they do is they transport you to and from your appointments, to your your point, boy, if you have trouble getting there, especially for research, you're not going to go. And if when you get there, you're kind of, your time is not valued and you're just sitting there waiting and it's not efficient and it's not pleasant, then you're not going to go. And remember, half the people generally in a research study are getting placebo. So they're kind of doing all this volunteering and you don't know if you're really getting something. And boy, it's those little things that make you want to drop out. Maybe it's not the blood draws and the having to take the pills all the time. It's just being able to kind of to get there. It seems straightforward and obvious afterwards, but it's not that way at the beginning.
It's true. Even thinking about things too, like I think that companies underestimate things like the importance of confronting, for example, within clinical trials, confronting a real history of medical abuse that has happened in clinical trials and the ongoing impact that has on communities. There's a natural skepticism of some medical research because of the history of things like the Tuskegee experiments, where people were intentionally not treated for syphilis to see what would happen to them over time. They were not given access to treatments. Things like that happened in our medical past still have an impact today. And so even things like standing up and talking about how you as an organization are working to combat things like that can actually make a difference for patients and show that you care and that you're thinking about it.
Yeah, it's fine to say that, yeah, this is a work in progress at this aspect of it. When we were preparing for this, one of the things that you'd mentioned is that you love bad prototypes. Tell us why do you love bad prototypes? I would like good prototypes, I think.
Well, sure. I mean, so ultimately the point of prototyping is to get to the right design, but I think people put too much pressure on prototypes. And they put too much pressure on the prototypes being exactly the right thing. And they work really, really hard on one prototype. And then they put it out there and they get it out there and there's something massively wrong with it. And they've put so much time and energy into this. They've ended up with a bad prototype anyway. I think one of the things that I do as a designer and that, that we have a philosophy of it at IDEO and other places that utilize prototyping methodologies is that it should be a rapid process where you are starting with a high volume of prototypes. And some of those prototypes are going to be bad or they're going to be completely wrong. The thing is that you're learning that quickly. And so you need to get them out and not be so precious with your initial prototypes that you miss out on the opportunity to learn. Because part of what we're doing with prototypes is not actually in early stages is not actually getting to the exact right thing right away. Prototypes are also a method of learning. So by putting out a prototype, you learn more about what the actual solution that you're going to design in the future should look like. One example of this is I worked on something that was a medical implant. And this isn't an example necessarily of a bad prototype, but just that a prototype, you're meant to do prototypes, low fidelity prototypes, to learn more information earlier on in the process. So I was working on a device that was to work with a medical implant. So this would be an implant that would be within your body and it would be inserted surgically. And you would use a handheld device or device of some kind to apply it to this medical implant and take a reading from this device. Can't get into too many details because it's confidential, but just to give that high level overview, that's what it is. So in our initial conversations with the client, they had assumed that this device would not give any kind of reading to the patient, that it would just be a standalone device that would send the reading to the doctor. And this was because they had done a lot of conversations with physicians, and physicians had said, where should these readings go? They had said it should come directly to me, and then I can inform the patient if there's a problem. There are all kinds of reasons for that. Some doctors know that they could get more questions if there's too much information that's given. They would be getting a lot of calls, people worried when they don't have to be, things like that. So we created a set of low fidelity prototypes and we took them out and They didn't have anything that indicated that there would be a reading on them at all. And we actually didn't ask people about that. We just set it on the table and said, how would you use this? They picked it up and they said, okay, great. So I would take this, I would apply it here. And then, so where does it tell me I'm okay? Like, would it be on here or would it be on there? And it wasn't even a question to them of whether or not they would get a reading. It was, where would the reading be? Like, is it showing up on the device or is it on the base station? And they had opinions on where it should be, but it didn't even occur to them that they would not be able to get a reading. And when we told them that, they were very confused and almost hurt by that, because they really wanted to see some indication, one, that they had done it correctly, but just some indication that they are either okay or might need a checkup. So it became really clear very quickly that that was something that probably needed to be incorporated in the design. And we can design it to make sure that it's not alarming or to make sure it's the right level of information. But by putting that prototype out there really quickly, we learned something really important right away. And it also helped drive alignment within the design, because then all of the people on our client team saw that all the participants were asking where the reading would be. And so it also, by putting it out there without any kind of reading, it quickly showed them that it should probably have something that indicates what the reading is. And so everyone was then more aligned together too. And that's one of the other that's the other power of bad prototypes is I like to include, even if we think that it might not be the best idea, I like to include prototypes that people feel really passionate, low fidelity prototypes that people feel really passionately about in early designs, because it can help drive alignment. So sometimes a subset of a team really thinks that they know the answer to a problem. And so let's put it out there. Let's put it out there in a small way and let's see if it works and let's see where it fails. And then that will help actually drive alignment. So by making it real faster, you can help identify where the challenges are and learn a lot more information about what you do need to ultimately design. And that's why I like bad prototypes, because they help you understand and illuminate. It's almost like negative space that's illuminated around what should actually be created. Like, you're ruling things out or seeing where things maybe don't work or aren't the right solution. And that can help drive you towards what the right solution is.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the Silicon Valley ethos of, fail quickly and cheaply, right? That's what you're talking about, low fidelity. So we can make it cheap. And if it's bad, that's fine. We've learned a lot. Now we know what's good.
We do a lot of work in the research process, because there's the kind of move fast and break things mentality. And I think we also think very carefully about, we are putting people into a research process that is temporary, but it is a meaningful process to engage in research with someone. And there are actually power dynamics there. So we do think about things like, we don't want to embarrass people with our bad prototypes, right? Like we do a lot of work in the setup of saying, okay, you may not understand how to use this. And if you don't, that's not a problem with you. That means it's a problem for us. That means we've done something wrong. That means we're not doing things correctly. Because if you don't set that up, then sometimes people can feel embarrassed or ashamed that maybe they aren't using something correctly, or that we're not getting the right information from them. And so really, we do a lot of work with our participants just in how we set up the space of showing them prototypes, helping them to understand that we're here to learn from you. You're the expert. If you don't understand this, then there are going to be plenty of other people who don't understand this. And that's not a problem with you. It's a problem with the prototype.
Let's pivot just a little bit. And I'm fascinated by workarounds and the power of workarounds. In the electronic health record, I've seen workarounds. I actually said to a physician once, and kids don't try this at home, but I told him that after watching him, perform some workflow, that if I were being paid to come up with the worst way to achieve the outcome, I would not have been as creative as he was. He made his life as difficult as possible. And then I said, let me show you how to do that much faster, actually. And not interested. He was not interested. It's like, no, I've got it down. I got that muscle memory thing going. it takes me a while, but I know how to do it. And I was just the power of that kind of muscle memory and those bad workarounds that people develop. So, how do you deal with workarounds?
I love workarounds for business purposes. The workarounds really point to huge design opportunities. And so that's a reason to love them. One of the things I find fascinating about them is that people don't realize or forget that they have them. And so they can really only be observed by going in context and viewing them as an outsider almost. That's one of the reasons why we do what we call contextual research, which is just really going into context and doing more observational research and watching how people do things and asking them to show us how they do things, because that's where you really see the design opportunities, honestly. They help us understand what people actually do versus what they say that they do. So one of the classic examples of this one that we like to talk about at IDEO, this is one of my favorite ones, is IDEO was they were setting out to design a better pill experience for arthritic patients. And so they were interviewing an arthritic woman in her home, and the team was asking her, do you have any problems opening your medication? And she said, no, absolutely not. I have no problems opening my medication. And so they thought, that's interesting. She has severe arthritis. Well, can you show us how you open it? Because we're really curious if you don't have any problems with it. And she said, oh yeah, absolutely. And she took the pill bottle over to she had a deli meat slicer in her home. And she took the pill bottle over to a deli meat slicer and she chopped off the top of the bottle with the deli slicer. And she said, see, it's no problem. Yeah, we love to tell that one because it just really illustrates the power of observation and contextual, why we do contextual design. Because if you watch someone do something, they've created the solution that works just fine for them. But lots of other people are having the same problem that she has, and they haven't developed that workaround. And so by seeing that workaround, we can really see where the opportunity is. Like if she had been answering a survey, for example, she would have just said, nope, no problems opening my medication. When we go in context, we can actually see what the problem is. A lot of times people can't articulate the problem that they have. Even if they have identified that they have an issue with something, they just say, it's just really complicated to do. Well, show us what you mean by complicated. Like, what makes it complicated? Show us how you're doing it and where the problem is. That's where we can then see what we need to design out of the experience. It makes it more tangible. It makes it more concrete. And we also can gain inspiration from how people do things sometimes. The workarounds that people develop for themselves can actually have really powerful things that we could share with other people.
I just can imagine myself in that group and saying, hey, can you show me? And having a deli meat slicer in your house and just slicing off the top of the package and acting like, yeah, that's how we do it. That's how it's done. Unfortunately, I have to ask you my final question. And this is a question that we typically ask, which is there something in your life, and I suspect there is as a designer, is there something in your life that's so well designed that you love interacting with it, using it, and it kind of brings you joy and happiness?
Yes. So I thought about this and I thought, what am I going to pick? And the thing that brings me, I think, some of the most joy is have you been in the Rainbow Tunnel at O'Hare Airport?
I have.
So it's called The Sky's the Limit. And for those that don't know, there's a tunnel, one of those long airport tunnels, and it's an underground tunnel at O'Hare Airport to get from one side of the airport to another. And instead of it just being like a blank wall of advertisements, they've paneled it. It was probably in maybe like the late 80s or early 90s, perhaps. I'm not sure when, but somewhere it looks like it's somewhere around then. They paneled it with just a bright array of pastel. It looks like giant paint swatches. And then overhead, there are these long neon light tunnels that correspond to this kind of like otherworldly music that plays at the same time. And it's just this ridiculous sensory experience. It feels kind of magical. The reason I was trying to think of the reason why I like it, it's completely unnecessary. And it feels like it's just there to spark joy. They didn't have to put that in that space. It's not like an advertisement that they're making money off of. It feels like it was designed just to have an experience that you otherwise wouldn't have if you were walking through an airport. And it just makes me smile every time. I just look up at the lights and just take it in.
Yeah, it's a bit of whimsy in the day as you're running from one airplane to another. Well, Brandy, this was great. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, and it's I'll never forget. I will never forget about the woman slicing the pill cap off with a meat slicer, and many other things that you taught us. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we look forward to all the cool things you're going to do.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. This was fun.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more on Brandy, follow her on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Brandy Parker Health. Check back for more episodes of Designing for Health wherever you listen to podcasts or on nordicglobal.com. Till next time, we'll see you in network.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review. This helps others find the podcast as well.